But countries have to consider, what does it mean to make that transition from efavirenz 600 to 400? Given it's not much cost saving, it does obviously represent some benefits for patients who don't have to experience mental nightmares and dizziness in the first 3 months of treatment especially. But also given the fact that dolutegravir is on the way. So I'd like to talk about dolutegravir. So first of all, we have regulatory barriers. Unfortunately, because of the changing regulatory environment in India, we will not have a generic version of dolutegravir until the end of this year. Unfortunately, because of the changing environmental, regulatory environment in India, and because of some gaps in terms of the intellectual property, we're not going to have a generic fixed-dose combination of tenofovir, XTC, and dolutegravir by the end of 2017. Now, this is a shame because, as you know, people are getting onto treatment earlier in their disease progression, which is a great thing. But it's best if we can offer people who are asymptomatic the best possible regimen, not only in terms of robustness, but the lowest side effects. So we cannot afford to have the delay that we all experience in terms of tenofovir. In this country, TAG Section 27, they fought against and they fought for tenofovir to get into the country. Do you know how many years it took for registration? 7 years from the time the dossier was submitted to the Medicines Control Council. We cannot afford delay to have better drugs into markets and into bodies. Also in terms of pricing, now ViiV won't tell us, they won't be transparent in terms of their pricing, but we know the generic that is going to be available is going to be offered for $44 per person per year. Now couple that with the tenofovir 3TC fixed dose combination, which is $46. So again, you've got a very affordable first-line regimen. So we need to get it out of India, into markets, into bodies. In terms of darunavir, so this is for second line. Unfortunately, again, a market pain, a market failure because of low volumes. Although there are 4 generics available that are either pre-qualified by WHO or approved by a stringent regulatory authority, only the brand name drug is available. That price is $663 per person per year. In terms of low volume, it's not just the second line and the third line in terms of low volume, where there are market failures. If you look at TB, the Philippines right now, they issued a tender for a fixed-dose combination for pediatric fixed-dose combination for TB, for drug-sensitive TB. No one answered the tender. They are not alone in terms of tenders going unanswered. This is a market failure. Middle-income countries, I know that we're going to have a presentation on it. Yes? I hope so. Yeah, okay. So here's their triple bind. You've got donors that are pulling out. You've got the Global Fund being incredibly myopic in terms of deciding which country has too much money but not enough sick people. Therefore, they don't qualify for more money. Or ridiculous investment frameworks that essentially say to a country like Georgia, even though we've got the first new TB drugs in 40 years to Georgia, all right, so you've got to pay for 50% of your drugs. When we have a new innovation, we have to move heaven and earth in order to get it into market and into bodies. Now, why the Global Fund doesn't understand that, I don't know. So instead, the situation that we have, again, donors of Global Fund, middle-income countries that are facing TRIPS or TRIPS Plus. We've got high prices at the whimsy of drug companies. So like some examples, dolutegravir. Now, I told you the generic price for dolutegravir. What was it? Oh, should I do slides? $44. Okay, for Belarus, per person per year is $1,900, the ViiV price. Third line, of course, is where you really see the exorbitancy. And I know I have a pretty graph, but third line, Georgia pays $28,000 per year for third line. Ukraine, $17,000 per year. Kenya, $2,400. So the other failure and threat, and you've heard colleagues talk about this just now, is in terms of intellectual property. Now, MSF, we put out Untangling the Web because we think by equipping activists, people living with HIV, governments, and global health actors with information upon with pricing, then that transparency could lead to better negotiation, we hope. But we also need transparency in terms of the suppliers, the prices, the registration status, and also the patent status. And right now we don't have this. There are some patent landscapes that come from UNIDAID, we need more. And NGOs, including some in this room, need to be supported in terms of churning out that analysis. There are also people in this room that have been working in South Africa on patent law reform. So that, including my colleague right there, so that we can essentially fight back against extraneous TRIPS plus measures, evergreening, and so on. We also need to push back against TRIPS plus measures, as you heard, whether through bilateral pressure, multilateral pressure, free trade agreements. Now, we have been trying, listen, 2/3 of the drugs that MSF uses for HIV, TB, and malaria come from India. 97% of the ARVs that we use come from India. When we met here in 2000, what was the price of a regimen for ARVs? Anyone remember? It was still $10,000. That regimen went down to $84 due to generic competition. We are only where we are at because we've been able to put downward pressure on the price of drugs through generic competition. Now that is under threat. So Prime Minister Modi needs to stand firm, and we need to stop the pressure coming from the US and elsewhere in terms of trying to get India to change its patent status, patent laws. I have to talk to you about DRTB, because we are in KZN. And as I hope you've heard from Minister Motsoaledi, 80% of deaths due to, among people living with HIV in South Africa are due to TB. So right now, again, we've got 2 new drugs for the first time in 40 years. My mom's first job as a nurse was in the TB ward in Chicago. She used, at the age of 19, the same drugs that we use in the field essentially today. But now we've got 2 new drugs. We can use them for pre-XDR, we could use them for XDR, according to WHO. They're cleared for that. Unfortunately, even though these drugs were approved in 2013 and 2014, and actually 2012, only 2% of people who could benefit from them have access. And here's why it matters. We have to talk about TB. So XDR, the cure rate is 26%. MSF experience using these drugs in Chechnya, in South Africa, where the South Africa government is really leading the way, I have to say. In 2 other countries, we're seeing 6-month culture conversion rates with bedaquiline at 97%, 77%, 84%, 75%. And yet only 2% of people in need have access. Now, Otsuka, that owns the drug Delaminid, they are not even interested in registering their products in the countries where they held the clinical trials. They have been sitting on this drug. It's registered in South Africa. It's registered in Germany. It's registered in UK. It's registered in South Korea. This is a market failure. I have to talk to you more about TB, because essentially right now, because of the market failure, even though TB has been around since the time of the cavemen, even though 1/3 of people around the world have latent TB, we don't have the innovation. It's not a sexy market, I suppose. And the net effect essentially is, as I told you, we use those drugs. Then as people develop drug resistance, we just add other stuff to it. We add a drug for leprosy, hoping that'll help. We try to repurpose another drug, hoping that'll help. As anything comes out of the pipeline, we add that. Essentially, we're adding drugs that don't have any phase 3 clinical data to show that it works to failing regimens, and hoping somehow it'll work. But as I told you, it only works 26% for XDR. It only works 50% of the time for multi-drug resistance. But now we have new drugs. The right way to do it, though, is to make an approach so that we can have a pan-TB regimen. Essentially, if we can get enough money to put out push grants in order to attract new researchers, new developers, if we can have pull prizes in order to attract, based on a target product profile, again, pan-TB. If we could pool the clinical trial data, if we could pool the intellectual property, because right now, one developer cannot access a drug that's in the pipeline because of intellectual property and the unwillingness to play. So unless we have an underlying principle of open, collaborative framework and sharing, that we're going to continue with the status quo. And here I don't mean just TV. There are so many meetings and everybody is agog. I've never used that word, I thought I'd give it a try. Agog at the money that is going to be coming forth for antimicrobial resistance, right? And drug companies are like, yes, governments need to consider what innovative incentives they can offer us in order to get us to make drugs for AMR. If we are going to be innovative in terms of incentives, which we believe in, then we must demand that it be linked to access, pro-access, pro-poor. Principles that underline including that if public money, if public funding goes into R&D, the fruits of that R&D need to be considered public goods. That means either patent-free or certainly non-exclusive licensing and hopefully royalty-free. And it certainly means fair pricing. Finally, I just want to say that this is essentially the movement that made people understand the failure, both in terms of the market and the market pains, between medical innovation and access. So right now, unless we take a stand, and hopefully we're not going to be suckers about it all, but unless we take a stand, we unfortunately will see more initiatives, beautiful initiatives with beautiful acronyms that don't have that promise of access. And if it took 16 years to get to this point, where coverage is essentially 17 million people who are only halfway there, then we cannot afford, both with Hep C, obviously TB, malaria, and AMR, to go through these pains again. And certainly people would have to pay for it with their lives. I want to show you one slide. So this is what I get for not showing slides. Well, those are the pretty graphs. Sorry, I'm not showing you. Again, because we're in KZN, because TB is the biggest killer of people living with HIV worldwide, I have to show you the demand that we and others have for countries to step up and promise to implement the WHO TB and DRTB guidelines within 500 days. I hope you'll go to the website, check it out, and of course, put pressure on governments. Thank you very much.
Please stay there, because even though you didn't have slides, we can still have some questions on the presentation. So I'm going to try to, I think you talked broadly about 8 different things, that's what I know. So you talked about the changing regulatory environment in India. You talked about the barriers to producing fixed dose combinations from drugs from different companies. Important delays in registration even when you have a drug that's available, the need for more price transparency, the challenges of middle-income countries that fall between the gaps of preferential pricing and higher patent protection, lack of transparency in patent status, which causes barriers to knowing even whether patents could be a barrier to generic production or not, and the lack of appropriate innovation and funding incentives for diseases like TB. My question, just to make sure that we all understand, is what is the changing regulatory environment in India, unless this is going to be covered by others?
So essentially, India has had on the books, except now they're not willing to give waivers as much as they used to, in terms of that phase 3 clinical trials have to take place in India. This is a problem across the board. It's not just for HIV. So it's a matter of whether on humanitarian or medical grounds there could be a waiver. There will be news about this soon, from what I understand, in terms of specifically dolutegravir. But even if there is a waiver from that requirement, we face it would still only be the end of 2016 for a generic, the end of 2017 for a fixed dose combination, and that's just getting a waiver one drug at a time. So that's the change, and everyone is grappling with it. Because as long as we have 97% of the ARVs that we use coming from India, any new product, any new FTC is going to face a challenge.
Okay, so we have time for perhaps 2 comments or questions if anyone would like to come up to the microphone. If If it's not the case, we will save time and then perhaps we can have more of a round table once we've heard from other presenters. So, going once, going twice. Thank you very much, Sharon. So we did, as I say, we did have a presentation scheduled from section 27, but unfortunately they're unable to make it. So I'd like to invite Anil up to make a presentation. So Anil Soni, again, someone very familiar to most of you in the room, no doubt, has had a very long career in global health in a range of different roles. Was the CEO of the Clinton Foundation, played a leading role in the establishment of the Global Fund and was the Chief of Staff of the Global Fund during the time of its inception, and is now the head of global infectious diseases at Mylan. So over to you, Anish.
Thanks, Dave. So first of all, I should say I am currently a representative of a single generic manufacturer, but of course there are multiple generic manufacturers. Some of them are in the room. I hope the perspective that I'm giving is representative of the industry, but otherwise certainly they can speak up. And secondly, I will be, as I go through these few slides, I apologize for those who voted against slides with Sharon Ann. I have 5. Hopefully that's not too terrible. I'm going to wear my hat a little bit as a Mylan employee today, but also as someone who used to work at CHI and at the Global Fund. I've been working to get drug prices down for many years, and now I'm doing it at a manufacturer, but I'll try to give some perspective from my own roles previously. Before I start, I do want to, as Sharon Ann did, recognize the comments that were made by the civil society representative at the beginning, talking about prices in middle-income countries. We as Mylan have a very specific perspective on this, which is that any middle-income countries that are dedicating public resources to serving marginalized communities, fighting HIV, TB, malaria, and infectious disease, deserve the same prices as any other person who is in that position around the world, whether in low-income countries or otherwise. So we believe, and I know other generic manufacturers feel the same, that if we're going to sell a product in Brazil, it'll be the same price as we sell it in Malawi. So that is what we do, and certainly it's a commitment to those communities. That said, the patents are an issue, so I don't want to be naive. Pricing is one thing, availability is another, and there does need to be the ability both in terms of the license that we have from the innovators and also in terms of the patents that are granted in those middle-income countries to access generics. So that's certainly an important fight. What drives price? Before talking about where prices have gone, and Sharon Ann caught the highlights of where prices are going, and I'm going to try to say something about that that's sincere and helpful towards forward planning, I think it's useful when you hear from an industry perspective to understand why is a price what it is? Is it arbitrary or not? Today, as Sharon Ann said, the price of first-line antiretroviral treatment, I think this is extraordinary, is roughly $100. That is 1/2 of 1%. 1/2 of 1% of the price at which the same product is sold in the United States. But our price from a generic manufacturer, and again, as Sharon Ann said, in the world in which we live, we rely on generics, most of those are coming out of India, the price is very much determined by the cost. And so what you see in this long list, and hopefully you can read it, and I know this is, if you're in the back of the room, it might be harder, I'll go through a bit of it. What goes into the cost of a product, the cost of a drug? Well, it's the active pharmaceutical ingredient, or API. If you work in the industry, API is an acronym you use a lot. It's essentially the stuff inside of the medicine that does good inside of your body. So when we talk about efavirenz, the pill is one thing, but the actual efavirenz is the chemical that does good inside of your body. That has to get manufactured. That cost, and also how much of it, is it a lot of API or a little, is a huge driver of our cost and therefore of the price. There's other ingredients, so there's other things that are packed into the pill to make it a pill that you can swallow. There's the chemistry. When I used to work at CHI, and still CHI does this today, they hire chemists to say, well, maybe at different steps in the chemical process, if any of you guys took chemistry and were in a lab, if you can get a higher yield, then your cost can actually go down. So the chemistry matters. It's not just an arbitrary price. The packaging, the manufacturing allocation. So if you were to come visit, and some of you have, the manufacturing facilities for these products, they're massive. No time in the history of the world have we tried to put 17, much less more than 30 million people on treatment every single day across 100 countries. The facilities that requires are enormous. I was in a meeting earlier this week with an innovator company, and of course they're driving the innovation and making it possible for us to supply these products in developing countries. They said we couldn't make 1/10 of what you make. And I'll say this on Atripla, which is essentially first-line treatment today, we make more in a month than Gilead makes in a year. And that facility is actually well bigger than this ICC. So the cost of that facility and all the people who work in that plant go into the price of a product. There's sales and marketing, and you'll hear that, but that's very little for ARVs because we don't have a field force. We don't have people wearing a Mylan or Hetero or Cipla shirt going out and selling a product. Insurance, freight, taxes when applicable, foreign exchange rates. We actually had a really tough time in South Africa in the last year because the rand to rupee exchange rate changed, and all of a sudden manufacturers were getting 20% less money, and it started going below our cost. So it was a crisis for the industry, so we have to keep account of exchange rates, and then margin or profit. For many people at this conference, I'm sure the word profit is a bad word. Certainly, big profits, I agree, are not what we should be doing in this space. But even small profits in the case of these products, that's what we need to fund R&D and to fund capacity expansion. So that big facility I talked about, we spent $250 million to make the facilities, to make the ARVs for 17 million people. We can make enough for about 9 million people, and that money comes out of profit. So that all of that, when you add it up, leads to a price. Competition is important. I appreciate Untangling the Web, by the way, the resource that Sharon had mentioned is great. You can now go to Untangling the Web, you can go to the Clinton Foundation website, you can go to the Global Fund website. PEPFAR makes this available. You can see the prices that are paid for products, and that transparency is critical. But there's a term that's thrown around a lot, which is generic competition is what brings price down. And I want to say, yes, competition is critical. Competition is important. Supply from multiple manufacturers is important because it allows for supply security. It means that if you can't buy it from us, you can buy it from another manufacturer. But we, Mylan, in the absence of competition over 5 years, dropped the price of Atripla from $360 to $160. That wasn't because there was another pre-qualified supplier. It wasn't because we were competing. It was because lowering price is what we want to do, actually. And as volumes went up and costs came down, we, even though we had a monopoly, kept on lowering price. So yes, competition is important, but you don't have to have competition in order to expect generic manufacturers to do the right thing. So here's some quick numbers. This is both history and a little bit of forward speculation. 2003, and again, I think this says a lot about the people in this room and the people in this community. That what's been accomplished on pricing is breathtaking, and it was beyond what we could have predicted. As Sharon rightly said, in 2000, prices were $10,000. Then the innovators came on board at that time, and it was a different set of companies, by the way, and they said, we'll offer first-line treatment for roughly $600. And then the generic manufacturers came in and said, we'll do it for roughly $350. And then there was an agreement with the Clinton Foundation, I didn't work for them at the time, I take no credit in this, to say with those manufacturers, which included Cipla, Aspen, and others, if you actually plan on pricing, not based on your volumes today, but the volumes that we're going to achieve, if anyone remembers 3 by 5, we're so past 5 today. But at the time they said, well, if you imagine 5 million people on treatment, you know your costs are going to go down, so price at that level, and that it'll solve this chicken and egg problem, and we'll actually see lower prices drive greater demand. And so you saw prices in that 1 year go from $350 to $150. By 2008, we were in a different world. We were in a world in which the price of that first line, that left column, was less than $100. But what we knew in 2008 was that was not the product patients to be on. Atripla was approved in the United States in 2006, and all of a sudden you had Americans and Europeans using a better product, and Africans and anyone else in a developing country were not. And there was an outcry about that, and rightly so. And at the time, Gilead said 2 things. One is, we'll sell it for $600, but they also said, we'll let the generics make it. And at the time, we launched right around that time for about $350, as I showed on the previous slide. That was the best we can do, but the prices came down, originally with 1 manufacturer and ultimately with more, so that in 2015, today, that product that was the better but more expensive product in 2008 is the same price, roughly, it's $100, as where we started. That's success. I'm very proud of that, and so should anyone else who's been involved in that work. What we don't know is what the price of the future product is going to be. So the world as it exists today in high-income countries is one in which people have access to dolutegravir. It's a great product. That's Neve's product. That was approved in 2013. It's 2016, and we don't have access in developing countries. And also TAF. which is Gilead's prodrug of tenofovir disoproxil fumarate. It's sold under the brand name Descovy. That was approved this year in 2016. So in high-income countries, you can take Descovy and you can take Tivicay, and you have a great treatment that has low side effects, great durability. You reduce viral load more quickly, but we don't know what it's going to cost. There's no innovator price for it. There's also no generic price, because even though there has been an announcement for dolutegravir, there is no announcement on TAF. So what I'm here to tell you is that in 2020, we are going to have that product in the market, and it will be less than $100. So this is not going to be a repeat of 2008, where the right product was all of a sudden going to be much more expensive, and we faced this crisis of funding because all of a sudden costs were going to triple to put patients from a bad product to a good product. The good news is that today, we know as manufacturers, the new product is going to be pretty affordable to manufacture. They're not nothing, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how prices are going to go zero, but we are going to be able to price them for less than $100, and I'm hoping by 2020, when you see large volumes, when you see most of the patients on this new product, we could actually be down roughly 20%, and then that will be the future state of treatment, less than $100, a little bit less than $100, and we can keep it that way. The advantage of lower dosing. So again, I apologize that this is a little bit of a university lecture, but why do some of these products cost less than others? Well, on that first slide, I said the amount and the cost of API matters, and I'm just showing you in simple circles why certain products are cheaper. So what you see on the top there is there's 1,200 milligrams in first-line treatment today. So if you're HIV positive in this room and you're taking ATRIPLA, you're taking 1,200 milligrams of medicine every single day. But the new product is going to be 375 milligrams. It's down 2/3. That means it's going to be cheaper to make. Also, by the way, it's going to be a smaller pill. That helps us make a product for less. Same thing on peds. On peds, the prices should be low. You should always see lower prices on pediatric products because it's really small dosage. For a child, you're going to have 1/10 the dosage and you're going to have a much better cost base. So the good news is that for first line in pediatrics, prices are not going to go up, and in fact, they should keep on going down a little bit. I mean, we're sort of at that floor now, but we're not going up. Second line is a challenge. Sharon Ann talked about darunavir. That's Janssen's product. It's a great product. Darunavir is a better protease inhibitor than lopinavir. Patients should be on darunavir, or at least abazanavir, and that's what the science tells us and medicine tells us in the countries in which these products are widely available, but it's not cheap to make. So we are actually working with the innovator, with Janssen, and saying to ourselves, how do we work together? And other generic manufacturers are doing the same to make this product available for less, because the market is used to a certain price for second-line treatment today that we can't match for the better product. That's a challenge. That's something that we have to overcome. Supplier innovation can reduce cost, even if it's not just the price of the commodity itself. So first of all, yes, drugs should be as affordable as they can be, but they're only 10-15% of the spending on HIV treatment. There's been amazing analysis, and some of this has been presented at this conference, that in fact, if you start changing the design of how treatment is provided, of course we've talked for a long time about task shifting, using community healthcare workers rather than doctors, but now Ambassador Birx from PEPFAR is also saying, well, for stable patients, let's give them 3 months of product and have them come once every 3 months, or even 6 months, as opposed to coming once every month. And if we as manufacturers can offer a product where you get more pills and don't have to come back as often, you can help implement a solution that lowers systematic cost. And there's been some estimates that have been presented where you could treat 2 patients for the cost of 1. Even if it's not that much of a savings, that gives us an opportunity, even outside of the price of the product, to lower the cost of treatment, to lower the price of overall treatment. Same thing goes for diagnostics. I'm not a diagnostic manufacturer, but certainly I've had enough experience to know that with viral load and CD4, and particularly viral load, which is what the world should be moving to, you have to go to a clinic to give a sample. That sample has to go somewhere. It has to get tested. Then it has to come back. Then you have to go back to get that result. That all costs money and costs time, and also costs adherence. You don't have, every patient doesn't necessarily come back. Moving to dried blood spots, moving to SMS return of sample of results, and moving to point of care means all of those costs come down, and even if the price of the test is the same, we actually have a lower price diagnostic system. So there are ways we as manufacturers can help support greater efficiency, greater value for money, and again, that's something we need to be doing. This is my last slide. I said there were 5. This is number 5. The last point that I would make, and this is really an appeal to everyone, is to recognize that there is a need for sustainable pricing. A lot of times people's eyes glaze over when you start talking about sustainable pricing because you think that's my excuse for charging too much money. That is absolutely not the case. There is a reality which is our cost of manufacture. There's a reality which is a cost plus a sustainable margin, so we can fund the R&D, so we can build those massive factories, and that is where we have to level out pricing. So if you look at a price volume curve, it doesn't go to zero, it levels out. And we're leveling out today. We need to at roughly $100 for treatment, and otherwise we get into a place in which prices go too low. And you might ask, well, can prices go too low? Is that a bad thing? Does anything ever happen if prices go too low? And the answer is yes. There are shortages. Manufacturers exit the industry. We've seen it in HIV, and I again implore everyone who's in decision-making positions to remember that in 2009 for ACT, which I know a lot of people don't use anymore, except for kids, by the way, so we still need the product, the prices dropped to unsustainable levels because of the differences in the exchange rate. The API and intermediate suppliers who we need in order to make the medicine, they left the market. We couldn't buy the product, and as a result, we couldn't supply the product. So prices went too low, everyone said this isn't worth doing, we couldn't supply the product, patients suffered. The same thing happened last year on lopinavir-ritonavir, second line. Again, not first line, not most of the patients, so maybe this didn't make front page news, but the price on lopinavir-ritonavir by the innovator in this case went to a level that no generic manufacturer could match. It's a separate conversation, but essentially it was beyond our cost of manufacture. We literally could not price it at that level. Oh, my slides have disappeared. And as a result, there were shortages of that product as well. And so the appeal that we have is to work together as a community, recognize, put pressure on us to lower prices, make sure we're offering those prices across markets, but then let's also agree on what is success for the cost and price of a product so that we can supply for 17 million and ultimately more than 30 million patients on treatment. Thank you very much.
Please stay up for a couple of questions and then we'll have a round table. Sorry about the slides. I guess you automatically get cut off. I wasn't aware and it wasn't my idea, but you were pretty perfectly on time. I like the sound of the 3-month packs. My question to you is, I don't know if you're at the plenary, but you may have heard Anton Pozniak announce the new 90-90-90 targets, which is $90 to treat HIV per year, $90 to treat Hep B per year, and $90 to cure Hep C. What do you think?
I think I love Anton. I can agree to some of those 90. So first of all, as I said, first-line treatment needs to plateau at roughly $100. So if you want to say $90 by talking about future products, dolutegravir and TAF, yes, we're going to get there. It's not going to get, I heard prices also being thrown around at this conference of $40 or $50. No, that we cannot manufacture first-line ARV treatment for that, but 90 over the next few years with the new products, yes. So I agree to that. Hepatitis B, yes, I think on $90, depending on the product we're talking about. Hepatitis C, I think that's going to be a challenge. That's lower than we can manufacture the product today, especially the pan-genotypic products. We're talking about tafosbuvir and declatosphere, sofosbuvir and velpatasvir. Those manufacturing costs aren't there yet, and part of the reason why is the Hep C volumes in terms of